Great. We have our panel of guests completed. I think we can start now. Let's start at 1:05, then 1 minute. And Lemmer, can you also please confirm that your video and sound are working fine?
Everything is working perfectly.
Okay, thank you, Mer.
Yeah, everything works.
Yes, everything seems to be working.
Perfect. So then we can start, I think. Uh, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from. A very warm welcome to the I Know Politics webinar series. My name is Amna Sayed, and I am representing the I Know Politics, which is the International Knowledge Network for Women in Politics. It is a joint project between International IDEA, UN Women, UNDP, and the IPU, and is funded through the European Union under the Wide Women's Leadership Project. Our topic today is From Action to Words, reviewing the CSW 69. And we have an excellent panel of guests today. I am so glad that all of these wonderful women had the time to speak to us about this very interesting topic. Let's start with the introductions. And Lamar, maybe we can start with you and go to Vandita and Sonakshi, and finally, not by any chance the least, Nayari. Let's go in that order of introduction, and we will start the discussion from there on.
Hello everybody. My name is Lamar Salagran, and it's an honor for me to join with all of you today here at this significant topic from words to action. So, I'm actually founder and president of Empowering Afghan Women, which we provide online education and awareness and advocacy for Afghan women who deprived of their rights and education. I have previously been a UN youth representative from the civil society to the United Nations and a columnist for the Spiegel newspaper. And I have joined many campaigns for Afghan women education, and throughout the past 6 or 5 years, I have been passionately advocated for Afghan women, for their rights, for their education, and especially for the youth. But so far, I have spoken at the 5 or 6 high-level event of United Nations and high-level conferences of United Nations on youth, especially on Afghan women, Afghan youth, and especially Afghan women education and women's rights. Because currently we are living under a situation in Afghanistan where women cannot enjoy all their basic full human rights, and they are living under a very devastating crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamar. Vandita, can we please have your introduction now?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. My name is Vandita. My pronouns are she and they. I'm the founder. I'm the founder and CEO of One Future Collective. So I'll share a little bit about me more informally. I came into the idea of justice with the idea that I can solve everything, and justice means someone is right, someone is wrong, and you fix it. And then I did so much work with survivors of sexual and gender-based violence, cure survivors of violence, and it really transformed my idea of justice. So I'm trained as a lawyer. I'm a professional lawyer, and I practiced for a while. But it was this understanding that justice is beyond revenge, justice is beyond punishment, that really moved me into this space of seeking justice, right? Thinking about what justice means, and then thinking about policy advocacy, leadership building as a way to enable justice that is not just about retaliation, but rather about sort of like restoration of those who have faced harm and violence. So my work primarily, we work with urban folks, we work with urban women and queer people who are facing one or many forms of systemic oppression. And we work on their healing justice, leadership development, and community building to enable them to access people power to advocate for change. At the same time, we work with institutions that they're a part of to make it easier for them to demand change, because it's really tough to be the only person in the whole institution, even in your family, right? To be the one saying this is wrong, this is right, when everyone is telling you you are the one who's wrong. So we work at that dual level. Our work started in India. We now work across South Asia. And we do some work in other parts of the world as well, in Australia, America, and Europe. But I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for thinking of me. This was my first CSW. So I'm very excited to share what it was like and bring back the reflections to this space. Thank you. Thanks, Kamna.
Thank you so much, Vandita. Same for me. It was my first CSW as well, and I think it was just a whole other level of experience that it was really new for me. So really excited for the conversation that's coming up. Let's move to our next panelist, Sonakshi Agarwal. Please, Sonakshi, introduce yourself and your project as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Sonakshi. My pronouns are she, her. Hello, everyone. I am here representing the organization Gender at Work India and also as a young person who works in the gender justice movement. I lead programs for Gender at Work India and most recently have been anchoring along with my colleagues, the India CSO review process of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which is an important UN instrument that was adopted back in 1995, which laid out 12 critical areas and actionable, implementable, actions and steps for achieving gender justice and what was called women's rights at the time. Of course, language have moved since then. This year, Beijing plus 30 review was the theme for CSW, and that became my anchor for participating in the CSW conference as well as the preceding UN regional processes, etc. as well. And this was my first CSW as well. We also work with the UN Women India office closely and with them work on another larger program to bring in more youth engagement and to create safe spaces for feminist youth leadership to thrive and also for their voices to be mainstreamed in policy making and advocacy. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining, Sonakshi, and thank you for that. And now we move to our last panelist. Nayari, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Nyari Machembe. My full name is Nyarazo. I am coming from Zimbabwe, and I represent an organization called Tege Life International Trust, Tali, as well as Identities Media. It was not my first time at CSW. I've lost count. It is a platform that we find very relevant for our work, for representation. And while we have a couple of programs in organization, maybe two come to the fore right now. One that works with adolescent girls and young women called the Leadership Economic Mentorship Hubs LEMS program that raises young women to be leaders. And from that program, we have young women who have actually run for office and they've won elections. And then we also have a platform called Adolescent Girls and Young Women Africa. We actually had a side event at the Commission on the Status of Women at CSW, our second event that we had this year. That brings young women from Africa together to have solidarity around their issues, be it political participation, pushing for their rights, however they look like. And lastly, I'm also very foremost in using media to amplify women and girls as well as youth voices. So I'm a filmmaker and I'm a podcaster, as well as have created a number of documentaries and docuseries, amongst other things. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so I wasn't exaggerating when I said that we have an excellent list of panelists today. We're bringing a lot of different context into this discussion about the CSW and the review of what were the discussions at the CSW, how do we take them back to the context that we are in, and what is the on-ground implementation, and together to sort of also brainstorm what are some of the strategies that we can use to take those commitments from mere words to actually actionable items, because on ground all our panelists are some of the people who are working to make this into a reality and a possibility. I will give a very short review of for the benefit of those who were not at the CSW. But also, before I move to that, participants who have any questions, please put them in the comment section, and we can either move towards them at the end of the webinar, or maybe even bring them into the conversation in between. So this year, it marks a significant anniversary of several different events, including the Fourth World Conference on Women, the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action 30 years. Uh, However, despite these monumental changes and these monumental dates, we saw that the CSW, and I think panelists would agree with me, that there was this air of doubt. There was the elephant in the room, where there was, the realization that there's a lot of backlash against gender equality. There's a lot of backlash against democracy. But at the same time, in the same stride, we heard conversations about women, from women, and activists who had been a part of the journey in these past 30 years. So I met a few women activists who were also part of the fourth conference. So it had been, they talked about their 30 years of that journey. But we were all very cognizant of the fact that there were some countries around the world where we were seeing a backslide in democracy and a backslide in gender equality. So that conversation, I thought, it found itself in every room that at least I was in. Uh, Also, just to be, in for the benefit of this clear understanding, but the CSW works on two tracks. There's one where their formal inclusion of the members of countries and their representatives, but at the same time we also have side events going on outside the UN building sometimes, which are led by civil society organizations and gender activists and human rights defenders. So these are the two tracks, where in which the CSW takes place. And then this year, something that was very well received by the global community and supported was the political declaration that was passed at CSW. Now, a few highlights about the political declaration. It contained detailed language on the violence against women, and specifically focusing on language against sexual and gender-based violence and sexual violence in conflict. We also saw that there was recognition of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, which was included in the political declaration. But also, I was very, very happy to see that was also part of the discussion in many of the side events, because it's really important that we start more formally addressing this sort of violence, because of because of the nature of this violence and the way that it is aggravating and sort of reinforcing patriarchal norms and gender social norms. So that was also a part of the political declaration. These editions sort of represent that we have made progress. I mean, 30 years later, we heard over and over again that, there was a backlash in democracy and a backlash in gender rights. But at the CSW, I saw that there was this comradeship, and there was this, you could see that there were women and there were people who understood where you were coming from, what you were saying. You felt understood and you felt included and part of a larger global community. I think for me, one of the most amazing things was how there were people from every part of the world. I don't know if there was like some nationality missing, but it was just amazing to see all those people from every part of the world coming together for this one cause. Um, so yeah, these are some of the, for talking about the political declaration, the way the conference was. That's something that maybe the political declaration that did not have, and we missed out on that opportunity, was talking about the LGBTQI rights and women human rights defenders. Perhaps one other thing that wasn't addressed in the same way and could have been was the sexual and reproductive health rights, which did not get a separate mention in the political declaration. But with that, I will now move to my amazing panelists, and I would want you to reflect on the political declaration, what that was passed, what were the formal structures that you think are now important for its implementation? I've talked about sort of what it has and what it doesn't have, but in terms of implementation, what are the formal structures that we're missing? And we can start in any order. Whoever wants to go first can go first. Do I see somebody?
Course.
Lamar, do you want to go first? Yeah,
Yeah, it's
please.
absolutely okay for me. So I believe the formal structure, so the political declaration which was passed at the CW is very important symbolically because it reforms global commitment to gender equality at a time when all the rights are under the threat all over the world, whether the gender apartheid that's happening in Afghanistan, in Sudan and Iran for women, especially in Afghanistan, which women experience gender apartheid uh, in Afghanistan. So basically, gender apartheid means that systematic taking away of women from all part of their life, from economic part, social and political, and all aspect of the society, and they kind of, force them to stay at home and make their life miserable. It make their life so difficult for them that they cannot even breathe under a extremist and radical society. I believe that, however, without formal mechanisms, it risks remaining any aspirational. To ensure that real implementation, we need is a stronger formal structure, including national accountability mechanisms. So the country should set up independent bodies to track and report progress on women's political participation, because in my country, Afghanistan, women have been stripped of their political life as well. We don't have female representation now. We don't even have 1% female. The female representation is almost zero, and they have been arrested. They have been ongoing arrested. The women human rights defenders and women activists and our women leaders, and they have been tortured them in Taliban prisons, and they have been arrested. All these activists who defended for their rights at the street of Kabul or other cities of Afghanistan, which we still want from the United Nations to hold them accountable. These political declarations, they were announced during the United Nations CSW and other events. It was just, all the words of the contempt from the United Nations, but we don't see any real action. Still, it's happening in our country, unfortunately. Women are still treated as a slave in my country, unfortunately, and they are stripped of their political participation, and there is no inclusive participation of women and other people from other part of the Afghanistan, especially from our marginalized communities. So I believe that this needs to be a time-bound action plans. Governments must develop specific measurable plans with deadlines, and it should aligned with declaration's goal, I believe so. And there should be a funding commitments for these declaration plans, and there should be a dedicated funding for women's leadership initiative that must be secured at the national and international level. There are some, projects are going for, especially in Afghanistan, there are many women like me who provide both online and in-person education after the Taliban took over. We provide education for both, for man and woman and youth as well, because they also experience a very horrific and very hard time under the Taliban regime, under these extremist and radical regime. But through our leadership initiatives, we need fundings to continue our work, and there's a limited funding for us, especially during these times of the new administration. I believe so. I believe there should be a civil society monitoring. There should be a grassroots and women organization should be empowered and resourced to monitor government's action and hold them accountable. Unfortunately, the civil society is not active in Afghanistan under this situation. After the Taliban took over, they started to target civil society members, civil society activists and leaders. They have been tortured and detained them in the Taliban prisons. And some of the civil society members, they fled the Taliban government and they are living in exile, but still they need voices it's not just, it's not just giving advice for one person, but there should be advice for youth as well, to include them in these topics, and include them in this table, which are so significant for Afghan youth to be a part of these tables. Because I have noticed during the CSW, during all these Afghan events, I was one of the speakers in one of the events, but unfortunately, in rest of the other events, I believe it was just an other old woman, I guess. So I just wanted to see, youth perspective in every part of the CSW, especially on the issue of Afghanistan, because we were the one, my generation, me and my other fellow Afghan women were the one who have been affected by this issue, and I wanted to hear their voice. I wanted to hear their perspectives about these crucial topics on the CSW, and I believe their voice and their participation really matter, and their thoughts are really matter, and even their experience and personal stories really matters in these CSW events and high level events, which are so crucial for future concerns and future matters. And I believe there should be international peer review as well, which would be a regular global review similar to the universal periodic review for human rights that could pressure countries to meet their commitments. So this was all my feedbacks, and this was all my comments that I believe these needs to be considered for the upcoming CSW, or this needs to be in the action plans for from words to action. If you have any comments, if you have any question, I would be glad to answer that. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very interesting points. And two things that I would like to, focus on are the funding. Absolutely. Without the funding, words will remain words. To put them into action, we need directly available budget lines. Working in the development sector, all of us understand this, that without existing budget lines, it's impossible to implement anything. So, absolutely. And then the second point about youth representation. I heard you at the CSW event that you spoke on, and you were amazing. Uh, and I think that's the sort of these are the sort of perspectives that we need. And that intergenerational dialogue perhaps is very important. CSW can be a space, and it should be a space to encourage and ensure that whenever a topic is discussed, we have that, intergenerational dialogue and intergenerational representation in a conversation and in a discussion, to sort of bring about a holistic perspective of the challenges that exist, and the way forward that we come to discuss in how to mitigate those challenges. Then um, who would want to go next and speak about
I'll
this?
go.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, and so we can have Nayari and Sonakshi, and then Vandita will have you at the end. Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much. I think I'll just depart from reinforcing what Lama has just said. The issue of two issues she raised, the issue of absence of monitoring the state parties as far as their obligations are concerned. I think that's a point that I'd written with the understanding that United Nations, by its nature, it's by voluntary participation of our nations. So then you then find that it's good that we go to CSW, the governments provide their reports and their commitments, and then we come next year and not much has changed. Yes, they go back, they implement, and not very much has changed. And as much as they come and commit to things that they're going to do for their nations, for their people, for their women, for their girls, they just come and report, of course, for the most part, over exaggerating their own efforts. And we have to understand that also the civil society has an opportunity to provide the shadow report. So, for example, Zimbabwe does shadow report. We, the women's movement, always do the shadow report just before CSW, which is supposed to work as a fact checking from what the government is reporting to have achieved versus what is on the ground per se. So you then find that you then find that at the end of the day, the UN, the United Nations, during this Commission on the Status of Women, they received these government reports, and then just a few weeks before CSW, that's when the women's the NGO reports, the shadow reports are received. And then one wonders to say, to what extent have we utilized what came from perhaps civil society as the shadow report versus what the government is reporting? So you find that there is not that effective mechanism to track implementation, to enforce implementation. The United Nations cannot force the nations because the nations voluntarily joined the United Nations. But you find that for the most part, those that are coming to represent their countries, the states, the member states that come, they've signed to be held accountable. But the United Nations can go so much. Which is pretty much the Secretariat. It can go so much in as far as holding it to account. That can become a little bit difficult. So that's a structure that's a little bit weak by the nature of the United Nations being what it is. And then you also look at the issue of funding. It really occupied the issues at the United Nations, CSW 69. But again, attached to the issue of backlash on women's rights and gender equality, there was nothing really tangible that we came out with as the women's movement, or as a structure that we can say we can enforce or we can improve what's happening, especially looking at the funding cuts that happened this year. So I would emphasize the issue of absence of enforcement, absence of monitoring what's happening. I think I'll end here for now. Thanks.
Thank you, and very valid points. My comment on that would be, and I don't know how to like sort of put it in a way that it comes across in the right way, but this is a process of evolution, right? The UPR and then shadow reporting, they sort of came together over time when countries reported, and there was a realization that no, the civil society also needs to have a clear indication of what's happening to sort of match the national narrative and then the civil society narrative to go with it. But I really, really find the point that you made very interesting, that how do you make sure that there's that gap is filled, and there's implementation of the issues and gaps that the civil society voluntary reviews presents. How do we make sure that those issues are mitigated and those challenges are also met? Because at the end of the day, the onus of ensuring that gender equality is enabled and women rights are protected is also the responsibility of the state. It essentially lies on the state to ensure that all citizens are treated equally, and there are no structural gaps, and there are no structural, challenges that women experience as compared to men. So yeah, I think that process of evolution, definitely we're still a part of it, and it's going, and it's the civil society that pushes governments to ensure that they're meeting the challenges of the time. I'll very quickly now move to Sonakshi and then to Vandita.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you for sharing your points. And I mean, just to take from what Lamar was also saying, I mean, ironically, funding for national action plans for implementation of some of these agendas is a literal point in the declaration, but we realize that itself becomes the biggest challenge to actually executing the points that are recognized in the declaration. So that's definitely a circular challenge that, as you said, all of us in the sector face. And also, just in context of what Nyari also said, that yes, we recognize these very fundamental limitations of the UN infrastructure in general. So in that context, then what becomes the significance of the political declaration is something that I also reflected on and tried to learn as much as possible. A few things, I think one is that in the way that many reports or conventions or declarations that are adopted as part of UN processes become, this political declaration also sets the tone in some way for where the conversation is going globally. It's almost like a recognition, right, of, okay, these are actually some of the key challenges, or these are some of the key agenda points that a lot of countries, or pen holders from a lot of countries agree upon as being crucial. And I still see significance in that acting as a basis for then us taking forward national level advocacy, or a basis for us taking that advocacy to other spaces, using that as a foundational document or a basis document. So almost like a signaling of the times that we're in is one way in which I saw the significance of this political declaration. The other one also just became like a recognition of certain emerging challenges, right? Like you mentioned, I mean, just the recognition of the increasing presence and impact of technology-enabled gender-based violence, or just a recognition of the fact that there needs to be digital inclusion because digital economy is big and artificial intelligence-related policies need to be mainstream to include gender, or just a recognition of the disproportionate impact of climate change on gender diverse individuals, on women and girls. And also that very relevant point of recognizing that women and girls need to be involved in solutions to, or uh, peacekeeping or peace and security related initiatives. So, I mean, while we all know that at the level of implementation, or at the level of binding or legality, sometimes these get limited to just being buzzwords. I also see how these buzzwords often become the starting points for subsequent meaningful advocacy to happen. The other significance that I saw is just that in the discussions as well as in the text of the political declaration itself, I do see an interconnectedness with other existing instruments, other conventions, and other UN processes. Some of them that are more binding, right? Like, for example, references to the CEDAW, which is a legally binding instrument, a little bit more than the BPFA, which is more indicative, which is more action plans, but CEDAW has a very legal angle to it. Or say the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, where again, 193 countries have committed to working towards implementing the SDGs. Or even references that were made to the upcoming International Labour Conference, where again, digital economy will be taken up in quite a few of the side events. There were discussions about how the discussions and recommendations emerging from the political declaration and from the discussions in the CSW rooms will be taken to that conference as well, because labor rights of women and girls have been mentioned in the political declaration very emphatically. Those are some reflections I had on like how maybe the political declaration can be useful or has a significance still. And of course, absolutely echo the concern that there is decidedly, unfortunately, a regression in terms of recognition of gender as a spectrum and emphasizing on the rights of LGBTQIA plus individuals. That language was absent, it was missing. And I think it was especially unfortunate given that the needle on that language did actually move, at least in, say, the regional UN dialogues that happened in the Asia Pacific region. I mean, there not only did a South Asia LGBTQIA plus caucus come together, but they were also given a formal space to read out their statement in the UNHQ in Bangkok. So from that regional process, for nothing to go into the global was unfortunate. Everybody in the CSW rooms also recognized how that is decidedly impacted by the times that we are in, and how certain strong governments right now have a particular stance on these issues. That also had an impact on the kind of participants who got visas and the participants who were denied visas. And that's a conversation we can have later. But yeah, essentially, those are some reflections on the political declaration.
Thank you. Should I come in?
Yes, please, Vandita.
So I will say that I don't have as much new to add, so I will not take as much time. I think everyone's made some fantastic and really relevant points on everything from inclusion to the legal binding nature of the document and so on. I will start by answering, I think a part of Amna's first question was like, was it still important? Right? Like, was the political declaration important? I come from a slightly naive but hopeful school of thought where any sort of movement in a moment like this is a mark of progress. And I do think that it was important. It is very unfortunate that it missed the mark on so many things. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about backlash as well in a bit. It really missed the mark on addressing some of those issues. I do think it is it's an important moment of reckoning for civil society and feminist civil society to think about if the governments were even interested in addressing backlash. Because I know, for example, a lot of governments were not, right? Because they are the ones perpetuating backlash. So I think really thinking about what is the space outside of UN and multilateral systems for civil society to come together and move action forward. I think that's a really important thing. Something that I have really taken with me from CSW is to think about what is CSW not meant for. Maybe by design or maybe just by consequence of how it's worked for so many years. And to really think about what is our ability to organize. Do we have the ability to organize? And I think that was what was really missing. And I know we'll come to it, but I will talk about this quickly here is what was missing was all of us are in such a crisis situation, given the US aid funding cuts, given world over how things are happening, etc., etc. A lot of us are very intent on like fundraising, bringing in revenue, us included, One Future Collective included, right? How did that impact our ability to meet our vision and mission? How did that impact our ability to do feminist organizing work? How did it impact our ability to advocate for our strategic priorities and not ourselves? Because unfortunately, there is a difference. Sometimes meeting the strategic advocacy priority may be less of an importance to you as an organization, but it is important to the movement. So I wonder the circumstances of resource, I would say, and starvation in which CSW was held really forced organizations to go against their nature of their mission focus to become very self-centered. And I think that was a loss because so many of us were in one place. What could we have done if we were not so starved and not thinking about how will we pay salaries in 2 months? How will our programs run? How will the people who depend on us now get access to critical services, etc.? So I'm not saying it's coming from a place of bad intent. I'm saying it's a matter of design. I'm saying that when you are forced into a situation like that, it takes away your ability to get over yourself and do something beyond yourself. So I think that was a big miss for me. I still hold that the declaration is important. I do think what is needed after something like this is much more structured accountability. And we need community and when I say civil society, I mean people-powered accountability. I don't mean 5 NGOs holding the government accountable. NGOs can shut shop tomorrow. Citizens don't just, ideally should not just shut shop, right? So we need more like larger people involvement. I'll share something we're trying to build. We're trying to build a feminist accountability tracker, which is a crowdsourced data platform for tracking progress on agreed conclusions, political declarations that emerge out of different interconnected, I think Sonakshi was also mentioning. So not just CSW, but the other stuff as well. But again, because things cost money, we will start with CSW. So I do want to talk about the fact that the first thing we need is accountability mechanisms. And for that, we need CSW to be relevant to people again. I know that when this whole thing started, like the whole Beijing 30 started, the whole conversation was how do we make grassroots organizations relevant to CSW? How do we bring them more into this space? But that's not the question you have to be asking. The people I work with don't know what CSW is. But it's not only from a place of like lack of knowledge or ignorance or whatever. They don't care. It makes absolutely no difference in their day-to-day life. The understanding that yes, someone will make a declaration, it will impact how money flows, how development assistance flows. By the time it trickles down to them, it barely means anything. The communities work with each other, support each other to get things done. So how do I make CSW relevant for them is a big structural underlying question for us to really think about, because engaging with multilateral systems costs money. My organization doesn't even have someone staffed to do UN advocacy. Each of us picks it up as and when we have some bandwidth. Right now, I remember telling one of my funders, saying, if you are going to cut money from a project and send me to CSW, I'd rather not go use the money on the project. Because how do I justify that my travel to CSW, with whatever intent, fundraising, business development, is more important than people who critically need this money for services? So I will stop there. I think structurally we need mindset shifts and accountability systems. But we really need to think about relevance and think about why people should care. And it comes back to things like, is it binding? Is it legally something you can challenge them for? Um, what does it influence? Can you show me how it influences that? Some of those questions.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Sonakshi and Vandita, for some excellent points. I will take up on the point that you made about the travel to CSW. This is something that I heard in one of the conversations at the CSW, so it's not an original point, but I think it's so interesting that we decide to have this huge conference in a country which is not currently a very strong supporter of gender equality as it is. It is very difficult to arrange visas. It's very difficult to arrange travel. And so you want these sort of conferences to have an impact and have included narratives from the global south, but somehow we never have these conferences in the global south. So is there also are we at the juncture where we think about the geographical locations where we have these sort of conferences? Is it a point for us as the generation that takes over now? Like, is this the should be the next conversation, that where do we exactly want? Because geography matters. I mean, it matters where you are in the world when you're saying something, and where you decide to gather a group of people to talk about something. So how does that impact? And maybe we can also reflect on that. But I will take this opportunity to move into the next question that I have for you. And it's about the backlash against democracy and gender equality. So we heard a lot of commitments from government representatives, civil society organizations, and just a lot of conversation on what needs to be done. But do you think it matches the challenges that we currently face? The level of commitment, the narratives that are around these solutions, do you think it meets the sort of challenges that we experience? Because, Lamar, like you also mentioned that Afghanistan faces gender apartheid at the moment. So did you hear the conversations at the CSW as to be proportional to the massive challenge that lies in front of us, specifically in the context that you speak from? And again, to all the other speakers as well, because gender equality is not doing really well in any part of the world right now. So
I'll come in and just depart maybe from the previous question that was asked by Sinash about the relevance of CSW, because I think it helps us also to answer this question. One of the key things that the conversation that women kept saying, and I love the fact that for the first time, I think the CSW, because it was commemorating the 30 years, you would then find that they were the original women that went to Beijing, and they were telling their stories. And one key component that kept coming over and over and over again, even in the times where we have backlash, in the times where the United States itself is not signatory to the CEDAW, Convention on the Status of Women, that actually is the anchor of Beijing Declaration, all those things that we are doing, is that there is the urgency of defending space. So I would also speak to the previous. I did soul searching for a number of years that I've been going to the CSW. And I remember last year I went to CSW, and then I went to Nairobi, where there was the NGOs, where we're discussing the pact of the future. And I think I had a deep sense of, why are we here? We seem to be doing the same things, probably the same faces. Why are we here? And as I was asking myself that deeply in Kenya in May last year, I think a number of us were asking the same question. And then the answer came, a lot of people answered for me that question to say, if we ever stopped going to CSW, if we ever stopped meeting as women's rights activists, the world is very fast to wipe out everything that we've ever fought for. So one of the key points that came was we need to meet to defend the gains. So that's one of the reasons why, in spite of the backlash, in spite of what we're seeing in the world, women need to come together at places like CSW to defend that CEDAW, to defend, to hear the states actually, being, to hear the states asking each other, holding each other accountable, us as civil society actually writing shadow reports, writing about what's happening. It keeps the agenda in our nations at the agenda. The gender agenda can only stay at the national agenda through platforms such as CSW. And then to just also answer colleagues who said, I think it was you who asked and said, why do we have the CSW happening in New York? Let me also share the good news that Zimbabwe actually, one of the deputy directors of the United Nations Women, the UN Women, Dr. Nyaradza Igumbonjanda, actually comes from Zimbabwe, one of the three directors of the CSW. She actually shared that this year, I think by end of this year, the UN would have moved to Kenya. So the voices of removing the CSW from New York, a country that does not even support, that has been actually giving the biggest backlash, they are very advanced. So the conversations have been going on for years and years and years. And I think we're actually at a tipping point. I would not be surprised in a year or two that CSW is not going to happen in New York, because also women are complaining that why are we even supporting, for example, America, which is cutting funding, which is not even, a signatory to the CEDAW. So I think they are very much advanced conversations around that. I think the issue of the backlash against women's rights, sexual reproductive health and rights, also links with the issue of funding. One thing that I didn't quite hear is how are we going to fund, but also there were conversations around alternative funding, us going after the probably the private sector. But also one of the things that will likely happen is to say, if we go for the private sector, for example, I'll give an example for my country, Zimbabwe, you go for a private sector and you want funding for your work, you're going to have to remove some of the language that matters. So, for example, a profit making may not be willing to fund a program called gender-based violence or GBV. So because they want to stay and not too strong, they are going. So we are going to lose the words that were fought so hard. And I think somebody spoke, a couple of us spoke about the absence of LGBTQ. I think this is actually the path where we are going to say there is going to be pressure to remove words that were fought for years to gain. So I think for me, in conclusion, I'd say that the backlash is there, but I think more than ever, we need to participate. We need to make our communities know about CSW, but also to look at the fact that for us to do our work, it's actually the result of CSW. Without Commission on the Status of Women, without CEDAW, our countries or governments having signed this, we will not be relevant in our countries. Just the ability to function in a community, for us to even say gender-based violence, government do this, that. We need to remember it's actually coming from the CEDAW. It's coming from CSW, where this states. Remember, at
Thank you.
fundamental.
Thank you, Nari. Absolutely, absolutely agreed. And yes, I think keeping the conversation alive is also very important. And you need to hear these things. You need to come together and talk about these things. But where is the question? Namar, I will go to you, and then Vandita will take your comment as well. Thank you.
I have just few comments about the backlash and the backsliding of democracy. I have personally witnessed the backsliding of democracy in my country. It wasn't a full democracy in my country. And when we talk about democracy, it needs to be considered a liberal democracy, which there should be rule of law, free and fair election without any corruption, election without any selling the votes or paying money for the people to vote for them. This is what leaders used to done in my country. It wasn't a free and fair election. We didn't have a strong institutions, and the strong institution really matters in the liberal democracy. We have a lot of democracies around the world. We have communist democracy, which they kind of target the opposition parties, or they target the opposition person who's running the election. But we want a liberal democracy that everybody needs to be represented there. There should be an inclusive society, and a state where everybody can enjoy their right. But today, if you're seeing the backsliding of democracy, because democracy it linked with a liberal democracy, definitely, because in liberal democracy, freedom is much more important than equality if we compare to the other kind of the regimes. But in a liberal democracy, which they kind of value more for the gender equality, in today's world, we have seen a lot of backsliding of democracy, and the one factor was the far right movements, um, the far right movement that's happening around the world, the populism that's happening. I have done a lot of research on this issue of the populism, but populism was one of the reasons that people have chosen these populist leaders to take over their government. And after these populist leaders they took the government, they have kind of messed up with all the institution and everything. But in today's world, we have seen the backsliding of democracy with the far right movement, and of course, our vote really matters as a citizen of a country, because when we vote for someone, this is how they can turn our democracy to a dictatorship or to a authoritarianism, and we have seen the result in Hungary and the rest of the countries. But my comments on this issue would be, for instance, Taiwan is a good example of democracy. They have adopted gender quota for women to represent, to join the politics in both the local, national, and international level as well. Even their parties, they adopted these gender quotas. They have like 50 or 60% of the gender quota in their legislature. And in East Asia, they are personally affected by the issue of Confucianism, which they are affected by the culture of Confucianism. For instance, if we look at China, they have this culture of they believe that women should be kind of their duty is to serve at the bars, or to kind of like serve that drink to the man. This is their responsibility. But as a overall, we need to think that women needs to be in the politics, and they need to be inclusive, and they need to play a role in the politics. And this is how liberal democracy makes it. And this was all my comments about the backsliding of democracy. But backsliding of democracy, backlash against democracy and gender equality is very important in our today's discussion. The political declaration and many discussion openly acknowledge that progress is under threat, which is important. However, the commitments were largely political reaffirmation, not legally binding promises, and giving the scale of the challenges from rising authoritarianism to attacks on women's rights defender, which is still happening in Afghanistan. The women's rights defender have been attacked so many times, like multiple times so far, and the commitment made that CSW are necessary, but it's not sufficient. The comments that they made, especially for Afghan women, for Afghanistan, it was just comments. It was just, it wasn't, I wouldn't say a real commitment. It wasn't a real action plan or a solution that would solve Afghan women. It is like last year I come to the CSW, I went to the high level events, and this year I went, and I don't see any results, to be honest. I don't see my country's situation. It doesn't change. It is still the same. And we need a stronger, faster, and more courageous action. Words alone will not defend democracy or gender equality. We need enforceable laws, financing, protection mechanisms, and real political will to make systematic change. And my impression of overall discussion at the CW was the discussion were really in a powerful tone, and there was a strong sense of solidarity and urgency among government, civil society, and young activists like me and others. I was especially impressed by the active engagement of young women from all around the world, and diverse voices from marginalized communities. However, I feel some conversations were too cautious and formal, and considering the severity of the threats we face, there was a lot of energy around diagnosis of problems, but less clarity about concrete action plans. And accountability more important. In many
Absolutely.
sessions, there was a clear gap between global rhetoric and national realities, and overall, CSW showed that the international community is aware of the danger, but it's made it clear that we must push harder for action beyond declaration, especially at the national and local levels. So these were all my comments.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
Thank
you
you.
once again.
No, thank you, Lamar, because you're the point that you make about Afghanistan ties in the conversation that we're having. Unless they're legally binding, things that are legally binding, how do we ensure that the commitments that are made have some are implemented on ground? But then that brings us back to the point that Vandita earlier made about the nature of the UN. In fact, a few of us made that point about the nature of the UN, where it's a voluntary organization, and even the CEDAW, which is people are, the governments are bound to do, we don't see a lot of implementation. We see that there's a gap in implementation, despite the fact that that is a legally binding instrument. So, this is the challenge of our time, and Afghanistan sort of is that case study, which shows how the global community has failed in implementing some of these commitments that are made not just at the CSW, but will now be made at the high level political forum, and then other similar events and organized groups will we will still, I don't know how much that will result in a sort of a commitment. There's a commitment and there's a political will, but where's the implementation? That's the question that we are asking in this webinar. Vandita, will move to you now for your comment, and then we'll move very quickly to the next question.
Thanks, Amna. I want to say a couple of things which are also in relation to what has been shared. I understand, and I'm someone who really does not get why we meet in New York, right? Visas are difficult. It's a nightmare to get there. My immigration process was so stressful and honestly quite, it was very demeaning. So it's not a process I understand, but I will say that some of the movement that is happening from the US to other places is not an intentional choice. It's not like the UN has realized that it's expensive, it's prohibitive, it keeps people out, it's disrespectful. It's just moving because they don't have money. And they pay a lot of their staff based on where the staff is located. I don't think a lot of the directors, etc., are essentially moving, right? Certain people are. We will see how it plays out. So I do wonder if the intention of the action is as important as the action itself. Second, most of the global funding is situated in America, in Europe, right? Like, I think there was some recent report which said 2 or 5% of global philanthropic money comes from South Asia or like our regions, like part of the world, which means if a part of CSW is resourcing our movements, it may just make more sense to meet where the money is. Maybe the question is to expand the pie and make sure more people can access it. I'm just throwing something that's a bit of an oppositional view into this place. But I will say a couple of things around backlash. I don't think anything at CSW is equipped to meet the sort of backlash we're having. Of course, it starts with funding. It starts because the right is funded so well. It's funded multi-year. It does not require M&E. It does not require project reports. They're willing to wait it out for 10 years and see if there's a result. In the nonprofit, in the space all of us occupy, if in 1 year you don't have some results, you're going to find it tough to get money the next year, right? But linked to this, something that I find is a bit of a challenge, and I think I also need to reflect on it, is I feel like we've professionalized feminist activism to a point where maybe we can't see it outside of our jobs. Because there is a space to fight backlash, which is not your job, right? It's not the thing you're paid for, but it is something that you commit your life towards, or it is a vision that you want to aspire to. Like, I know so many young feminists who are engineers, who are lawyers, who are marketing professionals. They do a lot of this work as well. But they don't wait for funding. They don't wait for, we will do it when my grant is approved. So there's this there was a meme I was seeing which said he would have changed the world, but his grant proposal was not accepted. So I think that's the point where we're at, which is a very dangerous point when it comes to backlash, because the right-wing actors are not moving like that. They are not just moving because they are being paid. They're not just moving because these are their jobs. In India, for example, some of the right's most prominent activists, or I don't want to call them activists, like leaders, are volunteers. They are not people who are paid. They're people who have day jobs and they do this on the side, right? So I want to bring that into this play and thinking about backlash. So I think when we were over there, I think Nyari mentioned it as well. Alternative resourcing was not talked about. Citizen engagement, people engagement was not talked about. We're so happy in our bubble that we just want to talk to each other and that's it. And we think, oh, the world is the same and everyone will, they will just see that this is the right thing to do. But that does not happen. Forget the declaration. I don't think the conversations and the dialogues allowed for innovative or expansive thinking in terms of countering backlash. Some of it happened in closed rooms, of course, because not everything can happen publicly. So I do think there's a big challenge there. I feel like one of the reasons for this dissonance is that sometimes a lot of our feminist movements are not rooted in reality. We are only available for people in their political lives. And I'll give you an example of that. The right in India, if you die, if someone in your family dies, and if you are affiliated to the right wing outfits in any way, they will be the first people that show up to your house. And they will be there. They will be there to carry the body. They will be there for all the rituals. They will be there for everything. When do all of us show up? We show up when there's a protest. We show up when someone goes to jail. We show up when someone faces violence. We show up for things that feel political. But life is political. Life and death is political. My mother being hospitalized is political. Not having food to eat, not having a job, all of that is political. We are not integrating with the lives of our community. We treat the political life of a person completely separate from their life as a person. And that creates a severe dissonance. I'm going to give the example of my mother and then I'll stop. My mother is a very progressive person. Over time, she's gotten even more progressive. She's been very receptive to what I share, etc. But you have to understand that everyone she lives with and is around, we're Hindu, we're upper caste, as is she, right? So everyone she lives around holds a certain ideology. When I ask her to leave that ideology, I'm asking her to leave her community. But I am not providing her an alternative community. And I think that's where a lot of gender rights or feminist organizations are failing, because we are not able to provide alternative communities that care for lives and not just for your political ideology and how you show up politically. And I think that's where the dissonance happens. We go to these spaces, nothing really comes out of it. Yeah, so backlash is something that I feel really strongly about, because I also feel like India has been facing it for over 15 years, if not longer. The West just woke up to it. I think we've been facing it for a really long time. I think a lot of our countries have been facing it for a really long time. And the answer really is, it's community. It's integrating and becoming an essential part of each other's lives, which doesn't allow you to leave when you disagree. It's so easy to say, I disagreed with this feminist or I disagreed with this person. Now I'm not going to go to their events. Life's not one event. How do I make it impossible for you to exit? How do I make it necessary for you to show up, engage in conflict, and repair that conflict? So I think, yeah, I will stop there. But I think that's a muscle we need to build to be able to do something.
Absolutely. What a very that is such a valid point, because I completely see I like see the argument that you're making. It's like so solid and right visible, because it's absolutely true. There's not an alter, but at the same time, just to not play the devil's advocate, but to add a nuance to it, it's this on one side we have patriarchy. We have people who are supporting patriarchy and existing system, and then it's the other side which is trying to undo an existing system. So I understand the inability of a feminist movement to provide the same sort of community that a patriarchal right sort of leaning advocacy group might. But it's just that lack of structure. But I think it's so important that at this juncture in time we also start having these conversations, because this is the reason that this is like the fundamental, you've touched the fundamentals of the problem. Because unless there's a community supported, community led sort of movement which is more ingrained in how we exist as humans and how we engage as humans, it's very difficult to have that same sort of sustainable and long-term impact, and to be grounded in something. You can't have feminism here. Feminism is, and that movement and that solidarity has to be at a very fundamental level. And you brought in the example of your mother, and that's very, very valid. Like, Here, I would also like to mention this book that I recently read, The Feminism of Our Mothers. It's a list, different articles that are compiled in one book and excellently written. Like these are different people bringing in how their mothers experienced feminism and how they experienced their mother's feminism. So it's like, it's very interesting. I thought just mention that. But that takes me to my next question, which is you've already sort of, talked about what was missing. We've already sort of addressed that slightly. But Sonakshi, do you also want to add to this conversation about what do you think was missing in this discussion? And how do you see, how can we improve or contribute in improving the future agendas that CSW has? So this is for CSW 70 then.
Right. Thank you. One thing that I just wanted to kind of mention in the context of what we were just talking about is that in some rooms, even at this year's CSW, there was a recognition of global patterns. I mean, what everybody spoke about in terms of just populism, in terms of right-wing radicalization of young people especially, only enabled by our increasing digital presence. There was a recognition of patterns and of course also a recognition of almost like too simply predictable political patterns that we're seeing with just in the way that the same kind of regime is coming up in every country successively, to the point where one self-admittedly veteran UN colleague did talk about how in certain rooms it was almost being spoken of as the India model being replicated in New York, which was like a new terminology to hear. And we also know that that kind of a political model is being replicated in other countries as well. But like Vandita said, we've been seeing it for 10 years and a little bit more now. So there was also conversation about how there is need more than ever for that collectivization and learning from each other, because it's important to find out, for example, what feminist activists have been doing in South Asia to deal with the political regimes, because those lessons are now important to take to their own respective countries now. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And just in terms of the backlash, to quickly add that something that I found interesting, but again, I'm trying to make sense of in context of what we discussed in terms of the funding cuts in the UN, which they were admitting to, which everybody in the room knew about the ongoing layoffs in the various UN agencies, was that in terms of the explicit political stance and in the way that, say, the Secretary General spoke and even other higher ups in UN Women spoke at the various events, they were very clear in their intent to fight the backlash. I mean, the literal quote literally being that there has to be a pushback against the pushback on the fundamental rights. And that became a very powerful statement that many people reiterated, because I think in context of the conversations that we were having, everybody almost fearfully acknowledging the times that we're in, hearing that did feel like a reassurance. But again, all of us here are also very aware, and we just discussed what the limitations of the UN are, or the limitations of UN women, even within the UN ecosystem, in the way they speak about are. And in fact, many of us, wherever possible, also spoke about making sure that UN Women as an agency stays sustainable, because we know that in many ways, the future of the gender justice movement, with some contextual nuance in the different countries, is connected to having UN Women stay relevant. And in fact, some folks within the UN Women ecosystem acknowledged that as well. So that's something I wanted to add. But in terms of what more to be done or what was missing, one thing that I did understand was that with regard to the theme of the CSW, for example, and this was a learning again for me as a first timer, that while the theme really became central to the text of the political declaration, for example, where references to the Beijing Declaration were very frequently made, and there's a lot of acknowledgement of what has happened since 95, the nature of discussions in the actual conference did not necessarily bring that in. So even, for example, there is a Beijing plus 30 action agenda, which the UN came out with, which in many ways is an outcome of this global review process that has happened. It was interesting to see that many participants, even by the end of the first week of the conference, were not really aware of what this action agenda was, which says something about maybe the way in which the outcomes of the global process were socialized, or how there are always like this multiplicity of priorities that everybody wants to discuss, given the thousands of people come. So is it even realistic to expect that there would be one anchoring thread across the conversations? But nonetheless, like on that action agenda, or with regard to say next steps on this distillation of the review process that has come out, I felt like maybe there could have been a little bit more of a specific discussion around that, maybe from the UN, like maybe nudged by the UN Women ecosystem itself, which kind of ties back to what we started off with, which was that how do we go about actually implementing some of these so-called buzzwords that are there in the political declaration. So that I found missing. And of course, what we discussed in terms of the gender discussion, there were many gaps there. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, absolutely agreed. I think we can take this to our next question now, which is about the implementation. You know, you've already started that conversation about how do we implement, but g- buzzwords, sure, buzzwords, but language matters, right? The way you say something makes all the difference. And it's over time that we've developed these sort of nuanced understandings and nuanced words and terminology to sort of represent the emotions and the commitment to gender equality and gender agendas. So it's important. Personally, I see that as a journey. The way that we now have language and the way that we use some of these words is sort of part of that journey of moving towards gender equality. And we take this forward with the same nuance and with the same understanding of the complexity of this problem. But Nayari, you have been to several CSWs. What was for this year? What do you bring back to your context? Like all of you are doing amazing work in your own capacities, in your own context. So particularly in terms of the work that you do, what are some of the lessons that you bring back from the CSW to your work? We'll start with Nayari. Lamar, maybe you can go next, and Vandita, and we can have Sonakshi at the end. So please, we're also moving towards the end of our session now. So let's keep this to 3 minutes. Also, 3 minutes each. And also, everybody else who's watching, please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the seminar then. Yes. Oh, Nair, you unmuted. Sorry.
Thank you. This is going to be maybe my last reaction because I realized that I left my power cable in the car where I'm seated. So I'm about to run out of battery, but I love that we're at the end of it. I just wanted to make a point when I wanted to finish a point earlier to just remind ourselves that the United Nations, the CSW 69 is actually about the states. It took a lot of advocacy for us as CSOs or NGOs to make it there. So as we are asking the questions, what next? What now? I think we also need to remind ourselves that we are going to implement, as per your question, in line with the realization that the fundamentals of CSW, the fundamentals of the agenda for Beijing is for our states. So when the states go to CSW and they come back, they committed themselves. So we must find ourselves within the states declarations and commitments. So already we are in tune. And also takes me to the next point that I wanted to make, that then it makes us as NGOs to remember that even our implementation should be aligned to the state plans or to the state. Every government usually has its own agenda. So, for example, the Minister of Women Affairs in our country has the strategic plan. So we must also find ourselves attuned to the strategic plan of our ministries as well as the development plans of our country, because then we're complementing. But notwithstanding that, we don't hold the government accountable. We hold it accountable according to its own commitments. So my takeaway from the CSW 69 is that we need to defend the space. We need to defend the movement more than ever before. We need more young women and girls to take up space to bring forward the next feminists, the next women, the next women rights defenders And I think that's very, very critical and important. And we must diversify ourselves, be all inclusive. Yes, this SW69 can be a little bit elitist, because of the problems that have already been cited, issues of, inaccessibility of visas and all these things, funding. So, but how do we bring it to the ground? And so I think for me is my conclusion will be in our work, in the all the women represented here. I know politics, all the institutions that are represented. Let's do our best to make sure that we involve women and girls and we defend the space and we keep moving against all the backlash. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nari. You've rounded it up so nicely. But I will move to Lamar now. And I
Well,
hope,
thank you.
sorry, Lamar. I hope, Nari, you can still stay till the end and your battery doesn't run out.
So just
You're on
okay.
mute, Nari.
Sorry, I'm gonna stay on the call. I'm just muting myself and removing the video so that I make my way to the car. Thank you. I will stay on the call.
Sure, thank you. Please, Lamar, sorry.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, strategically, the key lessons I learned from CSW are language matters, but action matters more. High-level declarations are important for setting norms, but without national and local action plans, they won't create change. In my context, I need to push not only for supportive language, but also for concrete policies, budgets, and accountability frameworks at every level. And from grassroots to government, building a stronger alliance is essential, of course. The CSW showed that change happens faster when diverse actors, youth, and indigenous groups, civil society, governments, and work together. And in my work, I must invest more in coalition building and cross-sector partnership, especially with marginalized communities whose voices are often excluded, and prepare more for and resist the backlash. The backlash against gender equality is organized and it's well-funded, and I need to be equally strategic, focus on resilience buildings, safety protection for activists, and long-term advocacy instead of only focusing on reacting for the crisis. And you can't separate democracy from gender equality, of course. It's changing women's political participation must go hand in hand with defending democratic values. And in my context, I must emphasize that inclusive governance is essential for stable, legitimate democracy, and work to embed gender equality in a broader democratic reforms. And what was missing in the discussion was, of course, the concrete examples, successful models, or detailed strategies that could learn from and or replicate, and accountability mechanisms. Because previously I haven't mentioned about things that were missing during the discussion, and I believe that many speeches focus on what should happen, but few explain how government or organization should be held accountable if they fail to meet these commitments and these requirements. And intersectional analysis, although intersectionality wasn't mentioned, but very few speakers had enough time to explore how different form of operation like race, disability, class, or geographic location interact with gender inequality in politics. And youth and grassroots voices, while youth participation was emphasized, but there was a still dominance of high-level government or institutional voices that limiting space for grassroots activities, grassroots activists or younger leaders to deeply, contribute in these discussions. And we should move from awareness to action. Of course, future CSW should focus more on showcasing policies, programs, and solutions that are working, not just, restating the problems. This thing happened in this country, or this thing happened in this country. We're just tired of, listening to all these problems. There should be a program and solution and policies to solve all these existing problems. And we should prioritize accountability, of course, and there should be accountability coming from the governments and from the states. And we should deepen intersectionalities and focus more on marginalized communities, women, indigenous groups, disabled women, even women who's living in rural areas, rural women, and LGBTQ plus women. They haven't mentioned during these discussions, and we should give more time to grassroots voices and encourage regional and local approaches that will tailor the discussion to acknowledge that solutions for women's political participation are often different across region and must be context specific. And looking ahead, women political participation started at a critical grassroots. The commitment made at the CSW reaffirmed that global support for gender equality, but their real power will depend on how we translate these laws, policies, and leadership opportunities, protections, and resources. And the road will not be easy because growing back a backlash against women's rights and democracy values mean that we must not even, more strategic and united, and we should take more strategic and united approaches to kind of get rid of these backlash and come together and solve these problems. What lies ahead is not just a continuation of the struggles for representation, but it's also an opportunity to redefine these leadership itself, and we should making political spaces more inclusive, accountable, and reflective diversity of our society. If we hold governments accountable, invest in young, marginalized leaders, and protect the hard-won gains of our past decades, the future of women political participation can be more stronger, of course, and they would be more resilient and truly transformational, society for our next generation. I believe so. Yeah, these
Thank
were all my thoughts. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And I agree to all the points that you made, but just something that I want us to also bring into the discussion is we're having this conversation because I met most of you at the CSW. So that sort of networking opportunity that it does provide, I think we can't ignore that either. It does, it enabled us to get in touch and have this conversation and reflect on the positives and negatives of it. I'll move to Vandita now and Sonakshi. Let's keep it to 3 minutes. We're running a bit over time, and I also want to have a last, all of you to have a last word before we end this. So yeah.
Thanks, Amna. Just a quick heads up that I do have a hard stop, so I may drop off then. I think for me there are 4 key lessons. One is the broader lesson for us to learn is that gender backlash often signifies and signals democratic backlash. And I think we took too long to recognize that and learn that. So there is a big need for me for gender movements to work closely with other movements. Second is something that I found, unfortunately, when we work with a lot of young people across India on preparing them for CSW or making them understand about CSW, is that a lot of multilateral advocacy skills are quite missing. So on an internal reflection point of view, I think there is a need to develop better advocacy skills because some of this is about how you do things, not just about the knowledge and the lived experience we bring in, right? I will reiterate that these spaces have to be made relevant to the grassroots again. And I think the last thing, and that's an important learning that I'm taking away, is that gender equality does not always mean feminism. And I think it's really important that a lot of us start clarifying, do we mean gender equality or do we mean feminism? Because the demands will be different, what we will ask for will be different, and how we do things will be different. To me, this also ties into ideas of like seeing ourselves as people with a responsibility rather than organizations with mandates. To really decenter organizations and their existence and recenter movements and their mission and the lives of the people actually at stake. So yeah, these are some key lessons and learnings and reflections I feel like I've taken away from there. And what you said about networking, yes, but I was also really enabled to be in this space by a lot of other feminists who said, it's time you should also be a part of these spaces. And sometimes that came at the cost of them giving up their own space. So I think Nari and Lamar, we were also mentioning about like youth leadership. I wondered if there is a space for more, and we also do work on this, so maybe my bias is there, on intergenerational leadership, right? Like how does the knowledge of how to do advocacy pass on generation after generation? What happens when for young people to come into a space, sometimes it is a zero-sum game. So an older person is slowly phased out, right? What are the opportunities for them? How do we ensure? Because it's really difficult to suddenly be told your views and opinions don't matter after you've dedicated your life to a movement. So how do we bring these streams of wisdom and thought together, rather than as a replacement? So how do we not fall prey to the same capitalist extractive systems that we're fighting against in how we treat the generations that we're a part of? I say this as a young person, but I'm a young person who's also going to be an old person, hopefully, in 20 to 30 years. And I don't want to be out of this movement then. I would like to believe that at 60, I have something to still offer. But I would also like to believe that I would make space for other 20, 30-year-olds who also have a lot to offer. So I will just close with that, that a lesson is, for me, a lesson in solidarity, and a lesson in seeing that each person can contribute. Yeah, thanks. I will stop here. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. That sort of intergeneration solidarity reinforces what we stand for as feminists and as defenders of gender equality. And on the point about the difference between gender equality and feminism, I hope you're ready for another webinar then, because that demands a whole other conversation. But we'll move to Sonakshi now. And if you can also give your final thoughts, I think we can close the discussion now, because I feel like most of you have sort of given us your final points as well. But Sonakshi, please go ahead.
Sure. I mean, one observation and of course a lesson that I absolutely took by way of being there was just the importance of building transnational solidarities. We've been discussing that. And from what I saw, especially across those two parallel threads in which CSW runs, right? The one that you mentioned, which is the more CSO track, where the parallel events are happening and it's a lot more open and inclusive as well. And the other more formal side event track where the events are happening within the UN headquarters and allied venues. I saw interesting results come out of the solidarities that people like organizations or collectives and governments were able to build across those two threads. For example, joint side events between organizations working with the ILO and the permanent mission of the Irish government, where say a particular government was able to latch on to an agenda that they feel strongly about, and the organization in the CSO space got an opportunity to then present their views to an audience that probably wouldn't have interacted with the CSO track, something as simple as that. But of course, for just very important political reasons that we've discussed right here, to be able to keep track of what the global developments are, what the global funding tracks are, what movements are being shut down and what movements are still existing. That's something I saw the manifestation of, and that's a lesson learned. The other one was about just like reinforcing almost the need for one of the mandates that we've taken up as Gender at Work India, which is to keep enabling and supporting and very actively seeking out opportunities to support youth feminist leadership building and engagement in policy spaces. Of course, I mean, youth engagement is a very big part of the UN agenda as well. But just taking from what we were all talking about right now, from the perspective of, say, bringing them into these, I mean, when we say that multilateral advocacy skills are missing, for example, that, I mean, a large part of that is also because UN systems or a particular language of multilateral advocacy still remains pretty inaccessible and very limited to a particular set of people, to the point where, I mean, reaching a space like that is often spoken of as a very large achievement. I personally believe that it shouldn't be. And that is part of why that clarion call almost to bring the CSW to other continents, to the global south as well, right? That the access itself should not feel like such a big deal that you get overwhelmed with the concept of simply like making it to those spaces. That said and done, I think we were very happy and almost elated to see some of that bridge being uh, uh, some of that disconnect being bridged, because a few of the feminist youth leadership cohort members that we engage with a lot due to their own determination and grit were at these spaces this year, and it was very nice to see them. And anyway, so that's one part of it. And the last thing that I just want to say in terms of lessons learned is just that we as an organization, and also, I mean, me as an individual, we find ourselves positioned in this way where we very much very actively interact with the grassroots movements, and now through CSW and related processes were are part of global UN processes as well. So as part of even the national review process that we were conducting, a large part of what we did was to break down, simplify this process, bring them to the grassroots movements, and try and make sure that the relevant parts are discussed with them. Through the review process, we attempted in as authentic a way as possible to take their agenda, to the grassroots movements agendas and recommendations to the global review processes. And now the lesson to learn, or say what in terms of what we're bringing back from CSW, is to take back these global conversations again to the movements, and make sure that community learns what's happening. And I mean, they're not disadvantaged completely just because of the fact that they themselves are not present there. So just to kind of reinforce the importance of the work that people who are able to go to such spaces have in terms of bringing those conversations back. So those are some lessons for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think so much of the vibrancies that CSW has comes from organizations like yourself, which have these grassroots sort of lessons to bring to a global conversation, and then discuss them in rooms where there are people from other similar contexts, not similar contexts, but different contexts coming from the grassroots are able to bring. So that sort of discussion sort of brings the vibrancy that we experience at the CSW. And Nayari, you want to make a point about the Global South? Please go ahead, and then maybe we can wrap up also. Unless Lamar has a point, we will just, then wrap up this conversation.
Thank you. I'll take 30 seconds just to build on, I think that was, let me just correctly pronounce someone's name. I think she has already left. But she made a point about, the capacity building of young people for CSW. A quick mention would be something that was raised earlier on, is that sometimes our language is not there, especially from the global south, because we do not field our people rapporteurs. Allow me to say, white folks from Europe and from America usually have dedicated people who are writers, who make sure that language is included. All these things that we think are missing can be answered if we are able to employ rapporteurs. They're called rapporteurs, that work with government, that manage to negotiate. They're based at New York 24/7, where compared to us who show up, once, and then in 2-3 weeks we are gone back, and we come back again. So I think this is something that I know politics, along with its partners, can begin to consider, to say, how can we employ rapporteurs from the global south who are just set at whether the UN Women is at New York or wherever CSW is stationed, so that we have our people ready to incorporate our language and everything that matters to us. And they are often advocating to their governments or to the powers that be at CSW to always make sure that the issues are included. So this is kind of a recommendation for I Know Politics to consider moving forward, even for young women, young people's language to be included. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think diplomacy and advocacy are a long-term sort of, the processes. It's a process, diplomacy and advocacy. So we need like continued engagement with stakeholders in this, and of course, representatives and representation matters. Sonakshi, you have a point?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I know we want to close. It's just
No,
one thing
please
that I
go
did
ahead.
want to address, which I feel like I will feel uncomfortable not addressing. It's this discussion that we were having earlier about how, feminism cannot just be done on the basis of grants. Uh, I mean, I think it would be an incorrect characterization of even right-wing populism to simply leave it at the fact that that's being propagated by volunteers who simply believe in the ideology. I think it's important to acknowledge that there is big money that is propagating that movement. There is a lot of very specific targeting of young individuals who are in fact unemployed, who are in fact vulnerable enough to be able to become agents of that populism. Digital as well as otherwise, and that's documented as well. So I think we should be a little bit more realistic about what exactly we are fighting. I mean, on the contrary, the discussion often in the movement is also that most people who are in the gender justice movement and then allies in the feminist movement also are here because of either our own lived experiences or lived experiences of loved ones, or because we know in our hearts and minds that this is the ideology that we need to stand for, but that doesn't always get the kind of monetary support that it absolutely requires to be able to sustain. And secondly, on community and how community should and absolutely must exist beyond political spaces. Um, I've seen that community exist in life beyond political spaces, even in our movements. I feel like it's important to acknowledge that very important work that trade unions and self-help groups and cooperatives and collectives do, very much in the way that they are all aware of what exactly the situation in each other's homes is, who the family members are, where their children are going to school, when they are sick, and so on. In fact, those are very specific tools in which neighborhood communities are being built. These are strategies that we discuss and we learn from grassroots movements. So that's just something I wanted to acknowledge, that there is absolutely an awareness that that kind of community is essential. Without that, there is no political movement.
Absolutely, very valid. That's very valid because we're part of those communities. We are part of those support groups, and that is how we are able to get up every morning and fight this system. So yes, I agree to what you're saying, and very valid point you've made. So, Lamar, do you have a last point to make? Otherwise, we'll close this conversation. But please go ahead.
My last point were I totally agree with what Sonakshi said about the how young people are joining these populism ideologies. One factor would be unemployment, inflation rate, and of course recessions that's happening all around the countries. And of course, the media play a role as well. Italy could be a great example of how the populist leader, they use the media to kind of attract more attractions. And Europe, other part of the Europe also is a great example of how populism ideology they use from medias, newspaper, and social medias to kind of, attract more people to their ideologies. And I believe that we all should stand together, of course, and that we should empower youth. We should stop youth to be indoctrinated to tourist activities, because in my country, a lot of young people under a tourist regime, under a radical tourist regime, they are kind of more into the tourist activities. They have a kind of like even indoctrinated schools curriculums to kind of having them more in handing them weapons rather than pens and notebooks, and of course education. And our education system have been also affected. A few days ago we saw that how some of the young, how they kind of changed the school outfit, how they could change the
Yeah.
school uniform. They definitely adopted a different kind of a school outfit or a uniform, which a tourist group they kind of adopt that. And I believe that young people shouldn't go into that way. In any other part of the world, they shouldn't go and join these tourist activities, and they shouldn't exploit it with tourism, and they should be rather more in formal education and in science, technology, STEM. And this is my view of today's world, especially for the young people. And I believe that we as the young people, as the young generation, as even as Gen Z or people who's in their 20s or 30s, we play a role in society and all these international platforms and diplomacy, and we need to maintain that and work for the diplomacy. And we should care more about our vote, as I have mentioned earlier. So this is all my final thoughts final thoughts and reflections, and I hope I will see you all in future. Thank you.
Sorry, my mouse got stuck. But thank you so much, Lamar. Thank you for those points, and thank you all of the panelists. Vandita has left, but it was so nice. This discussion felt like, uh, there were things that I needed to talk about with people who had been at the CSW. So it was also like personally, it was so nice to hear all of you and all these points that you've made. I think the future of the women's movement and the feminist movement is not bleak at all. There are people who are working day in, day out to make sure that we are set in the right direction and we're moving towards the goals that we aim for. There are people who will make sure that the governments who commit to doing some of these ch things and meeting some of these challenges will actually on ground do that. And so I hope to see you in other conversations. I hope to see you again in different rooms, in in spaces that are discussing gender equality and movements. So it has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I will reach out to separately each of you to thank you for this. And thank you to everybody else who joined. I don't know if we have any questions, but
Yeah.
because we are out of time, I don't know. Maybe we can. There's one question that I see, which is about any plans for girls. So Huda has sent this question in. Any plans for girls, women in Afghanistan who are fighting alone against this huge plot of silence and exclusion? Um, Maybe, Lamar, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. Well, we as an activist in exile, so many of us, like thousands of us in exile, we even have a civil society group. And last time we went together with the United Nations, like 2 times I went together with them as a delegation to go and speak with different countries' missions, United Nations, different countries' missions to do awareness and advocacy. We have even did awareness in Congress level. We did awareness in international level. We have been speaking at the international levels like United Nations. We have used these media channels to kind of do more awareness about Afghan women. We have even spoken at the European Unions. But so far, there is no real action plan. There is no real solution for this cause. Nobody is paying attention. Everybody is busy in other kind of conflicts, and there's no, so far there is no any plans that I would specifically address that this needs to be done. The plans need to come out from international community, especially from the United Nations. But United Nations, we have been criticized, UNAMO, many times. One of the department of the United Nations, which is called UNAMO, they work directly in Afghanistan, but most of the time they speak the words of the Taliban, unfortunately. And there has been an exclusion of women, of course. Things are getting worse in my country, but we activists as an exile, we always speak for Afghan women. We always go to different places. We always do our efforts to kind of push the words to, push the words for action. And we kind of, we try to force the word that they wouldn't forget about Afghan women. But the problem is we need action from governments. We need action from the international community. And we don't need any more like condemnation, like, oh, we criticize this as a government, we criticize this as an international community. This is this is the thing that's coming from the United Nations and rest of the governments. So there's no any plan so far. I don't know about any other future plans. I'm just waiting for the international community to tell me their last plan. And even the rest of the countries, they are not interested about the foreign affairs. They are not interested about Afghanistan anymore. Any other countries, US, European Union countries, the West, they are no longer interested in the issue of Afghanistan and Afghan women. And I feel like we are left behind. We are abandoned with all our challenges. At some point, I feel like our minds needs to, take a stand for us now. They need to, get rid of this silence. They need to uh, stand for us like the same thing that the man in Iran did for their woman, especially for woman freedom and work. So we need the same thing from our man. We expect them to, stand with us and get rid of these patriarchal norms and
Mm.
the strategies that's happening in our society. But unfortunately, it continues. And but there are some man, as I have mentioned in the CSW. You remember Amna when you were there, like they are our family members, our male family members who support us to go and abroad and pursue our education. This is, a huge thing that our male family member can do for us. And of course, uh, I guess it needs a revolution to happen. So we should kick off the current authoritarian regime. So this is what I believe, and this is what I stand. This is like all my thoughts I can, address.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lamar. Thank you. And we stand in solidarity with you. We stand in solidarity with the women of Afghanistan. And
Thanks a lot.
when you need to make the noise, I know politics is always available as a platform for you to do so. But thank you so much. This has been a wonderful discussion. This has been very, very, very instructive and insightful. We do have an upcoming webinar on the 9th of May, which will be in Arabic, and then one which will focus specifically on Syria, but please stay tuned to I Know Politics and the many social media accounts that we're working with. We'll announce when the discussion on Syria will specifically happen. But thank you so much once again, both of you who are now still on the call with us, but and everybody else who's here as well, and Vandita and Nayari as well who had to leave. But thank you so much. This has been very, very interesting and a very good day to all of you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Bye.
Like, it was a very good day for all of you as well. Like,
Take care.
thank you. Bye bye. Have a good day.